Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery preparing to check in on my so-called original red wiggler worms. They've now reached 150 days of age. And you know, the last time we were in here 10 days ago to feed them, they were getting feeding number 13. So today I'm planning to give them feeding number 14. Over there on the side you can see a nice little assortment of kitchen scraps that we're going to be giving them today. But I wanted to try to see if I can capture something in the very beginning when we first start rolling the camera. I noticed in the last check-ins footage, right when I removed the plastic top coverings, I was able to see some stuff moving around, mainly in bin number 1. And I was really curious to see if we can maybe get a closer look at just what was going on over there. So my idea was to set this camera up that you saw a moment ago, just fell out of screen, and see if I can capture anything. I just hit record on the other camera, and I wanted to just get right to it. Remove these top coverings, and I do remember seeing whatever it was that I saw moving around all over the place in all the different sections of the bin. So I'm just sort of taking a chance at possibly capturing what I'm looking to see by aiming it down in the general vicinity of the bin. So I'm just going to see if I could reach over there and possibly verify the focus. And I'm just going to let the camera roll, and I'm going to try to observe closely to see if I can see any of that stuff that's moving around that I was seeing, that I was curious to see what it was. So let's just observe for a moment and see what we can see. Now, you know, I noticed something right here on the wall of the container. So I'm going to come in here with my phone, which actually gives me pretty nice, tight filming capabilities with a flash on there. So I'm going to see if I can capture that little thing so we can see what the heck it is. Because you know, my eyesight ain't what it used to be. Huh, look at that. It's a little itsy bitsy tiny snail. I was not expecting that. Every time I see something that looks like a snail shell, I always assume that it's a like a curled up millipede or something, but I guess there are. I guess there actually are snails in my worm bins. Who would have thunk it? Crazy. And you know, it's interesting. Now that I know what I'm looking for, I actually can see them. I thought I saw one right there, and I could see one right there. Little guys. Over here, too, I saw a pretty good size one. Huh. Not sure if it's going to be visible on my palm, but you can see how big it is. Not very big at all. Alright, so, whatever. I just wanted to satisfy my curiosity. It was funny because when I was watching the video and I, you know, observed myself removing the coverings from this system, I didn't see any of it over here, but I definitely saw a bunch of it over here. But you know what? Now that we're on the topic and I know what I'm looking for, I could see one over here too. And one right there. So, for whatever reason, I guess I was, you know, finding it very easy to spot them over here in bin number 1, but they do seem to be hanging out in both systems. All right. After only 10 days since the last feeding, it's not too surprising that we've got a pretty good sized turnout down here in the middle where we last fed. I think some of the stuff that I'm seeing down here is some of that shredded corn cob, corn on the cob, because the corn was still on the cob when I shredded it. Because I saw a kernel of corn somewhere over here, or a couple of them. Which I'm a little surprised to see as leftovers. It was the sort of thing that I thought the worms would just tear to shreds 1, 2, 3. And yeah, these systems do seem to have a pretty good sized population in them, because the feeding zone has got a nice turnout, good number of worms hanging out. Here and there I'm spotting other things, something that looked to me like a banana stem. And there was another thing that felt like it was kind of getting caught between my fingers as I raked through the material. Not sure what it was. It did feel like a larger object, which might be this right here. What it is, I don't know. It might be corn cob. That's what it is. But my new thing on corn cobs these days is to bust them apart when I find them. So that's what I'm doing. So that looks pretty good in bin number 1. For me, bin number 2 is usually the one that's to my left. So reading left to right, I guess that's the habit I've developed over time. I find myself always going into bin number 1 when I start my check-ins, but today or bin number 2, I'm sorry. But since bin number 1 was where I was focusing my attention with the other camera, I think we just ended up over there because of that primarily. So I've got some interesting bedding that I planned on dropping down here as the foundation for today's feeding. It looks like we probably used a good bit of my prepared bedding because I could see all kinds of pieces of shredded paper and cardboard down here in the feeding area. But what I've got is some kind of tissue paper that was, included in a package as sort of padding for the package. And it's a pretty good sized piece, but I think if I were to tear it into a few chunks, it would be just about the right amount of material to drop in as the foundation for a feeding in 2 worm bins. So that's what I've got here on the side. Here's some more corn cob. There's just something very distinct about it, very easy to recognize. So I'm just sticking to my new game plan of busting that stuff up whenever I encounter it. Meaning we're probably not going to see much of it in the coming weeks or months. A little different from what would happen if I played my old strategy of not interfering with the breakdown process and just leaving the corn cobs to deteriorate in the worm bin at their own pace without help. I guess when I got into the new thing that I was trying, which was to try shredding the corn on the cob into those little flakes, I decided, well, out with the old, in with the new as far as strategy on on corn cob. So this is that piece of paper that I mentioned earlier, and it's kind of tissue paper sort of, and it's really lightweight stuff, so I'm assuming that the worms are just going to tear it to shreds. And I believe that that's even more likely to happen if we put food right up against it in multiple locations. So I thought that maybe we would put only a piece of it down at the very bottom and then start right into the application of some delicious morsels of food for them. So it's getting late in the season, and you can see how some of my cucumbers are looking on my vine, kind of skinny and starting to deteriorate. And even some of my tomatoes aren't looking too healthy. So I guess stuff that's becoming kind of disqualified as human food in the house is turning into worm food. All lovely fresh stuff that the worms are probably really going to appreciate down here. Yeah, there's a good bit of this stuff. All these chunks that just didn't really look quite right, they all got discarded and are going to be turned into worm food. This is like the butt end of a head of lettuce. And even over here is the end of a scallion with some roots on it. I don't know why, I just find myself wanting to try to identify things when I pick through a collection of stuff like this, because some of it isn't quite as obvious as you would think. Even over here, a little bit of an oddball item, a little bit of citrus, which occasionally makes it into my worm bin feedings. So, one thing I forgot to do though, which I talked about and distracted myself from doing, was alternating and putting all kinds of yummy stuff in contact with this bedding material. So we'll use what we have remaining here to try to complete that thought. A couple more chunks of veggie, and then we've got some coffee we could sprinkle in as the next layer. So let's get that in here. And I've also got my worm chow, which we can sprinkle in, which I normally sprinkle into my application of coffee. So why don't we do that? Stick to my goofy traditions. So my worm chow is this kind of fine powdery stuff made up of whatever I've got floating around the house. My next batch is going to be consisting of a bunch of leftover rice, a bunch of reclaimed pepper seeds that I held on to rather than chucking them out into the compost barrel. I've got a whole bunch of veggie noodles. So noodles that are not made out of wheat, but rather out of different types of vegetables. So those noodles are going to become worm food too. I'm trying to think what else I got. Oh yeah, a whole bunch of pumpkin seeds. A whole bunch of pumpkin seeds that were in the cabinet and sort of got forgotten about, and they just didn't taste quite right for human consumption, but stuff that I'm assuming the worms are going to really enjoy. So I kind of thought we might include the old coffee filter down here as supplementary bedding as well down in the feeding area, since we've got nice new replacements. And since I've got my worm chow and there's nothing else as far as food to apply, we're just going to dress up this stuff over here with a little bit of worm chow, and that should get the worms coming out in good numbers to feast on that feeding zone, and at the same time they're going to be able to not only enjoy some yummy kitchen scraps, but hopefully nibble away a little bit on the paper that was put in there to serve the function of bedding, supplementary bedding. Right. Just bumping into a few more chunks of corn cob, and I'm finding it difficult to resist the urge to crush them if they give, and they all seem to give at this point, so they must have been in here for some time now. A little bit more bedding here and there. But you know what, let me just keep going. I'm going to keep going as far as just excavating this edge closer to me, and then we'll excavate the edge closer to you, to where the camera is, just to make sure everything looks good, and to aerate things and to mix stuff up. I think my main purpose for liking to do that is to basically to aerate the material and not let myself get all caught up in just always feeding down the middle and then ignoring the other portions of the bin. But it's also kind of fun because, you know, the worms do actually hang out in those outer edges too. Even though the foods are typically getting applied down the center of the bin, the outer edges also seem to be a prime location to do a little bit of worm spotting. So it's kind of fun too. So let's set our feeding zone indicators aside briefly, and then we're just going to wind things up here by tilling up and aerating and observing how things look on this edge furthest from me. Once again, good amounts of worms and lots of castings piling up, which is nice. So I think that pretty much gets us to where we want to be over here in bin number 2. More corn cob. Can't resist breaking it up. So let's go ahead and drop in the replacement feeding zone indicator and give the same treatment to bin number 1 over here. Once again, lots of nice castings out there furthest from where the feedings are getting applied. Which kind of makes sense, you know. I usually till up the feeding zone, apply new food there, and old scraps make their way out of there, stuff that hasn't been consumed, and all the corn cob we've been bumping into along the way has been clear evidence of that. And I think for that reason the worms are quite content to be just about anywhere within the systems, because there's stuff for them to chew on pretty much everywhere. Luckily there's even though there's a lot of castings out on the outer edges of the bins, I do still find little bits of bedding material out there too. And I suppose that's another advantage to doing this tilling up and stirring of material around. So I'm also kind of introducing a little bit more bedding type materials to those outskirts of the bin, because I'll typically focus the replenishment of the bedding supply in the middle where I apply the foods. So by doing these kind of explorations of the bin and stirring stuff around, I also feel like I'm kind of introducing a little bit of additional stuff to those outer edges of the system so that it doesn't just end up being all castings out there. All right, well, usually when I see a lot of stuff sticking to my glove, it tells me that perhaps the moisture level is a little bit high in a bin. But I don't think that's a problem here. At 150 days of age, these systems got a ways to go, I think. And keeping things nice and damp is the way the worms like it. So no harm in keeping things comfortable for the worms, keeping them productive, keeping them comfortable. So that leaves me with the need to take care of a few things in terms of getting stuff cleaned up and put away. But I'm not going to waste your time with that. That's boring. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.